Okay, we're going to start the eighth module with a couple of, well, this eighth module is going to have two lecture videos or PowerPoints, part one and part two. The name of this section I'm calling Decolonize Your Taste Buds. And it ties in with the section in the original instructions book on You Are What You Eat. So one of the first questions that comes up when we talk about our taste buds having been colonized is, what do we mean by that? And basically what we mean by that is, as indigenous people, we've had what we call our traditional foods, and that is those foods that have sustained us for hundreds or perhaps thousands of years. Those foods that we've developed a culinary science around cooking, regardless of what it may be. And so how have we become colonized? Well, one of the things is that we no longer grow our own food or gather our own food. And so by doing so, we're kind of become dependent upon the system, I suppose you'd say. That we have had as we no longer grow our own food, we've given authority to somebody else to provide our food for us. Another aspect of decolonizing or colonization of our taste buds is a lot of times we don't have access to what we would consider our traditional foods. And this may be a reality because of land ownership patterns that where things perhaps grow. If you're come from a hunting and gathering community, there may be certain kinds of plants or tubers or berries or fruits or vegetables that you may have gone out and gathered as a tribe in pre-contact times, but now because of land ownership patterns, you no longer have access to that land where those things grow. For people who collect salmon, sometimes their traditional sites for when they, you know, do their trapping or do their netting of salmon have been filled up by the result of dams being built. And perhaps even in relation to salmon, a lot of times the fact that these dams have been built have reduced the number of salmon that are available. And commercial fishing has also impacted. So when we start talking about access to traditional foods, we're looking at what is there that keeps us from going back and using and getting those traditional foods. In some cases, some of the traditional foods have been wiped out. There's this bird called the passenger pigeon. I think the last one was killed in 1911 or 1913. And those are certainly a source of food, not only the bird itself, but its eggs. And for those tribes that lived within the area that that passenger pigeon lived in, um, inhabited, there's really no way that that particular food can ever come back. And the same thing almost happened to the bison. So we've got this question of being able to access our traditional foods. And another element of accessing our traditional foods is also remembering how to cook our traditional foods. A lot of the traditional knowledge around the culinary arts has been lost because those foods are no longer available to be used. The elderly who remember those recipes and those processes for processing the food have passed on, and there's really nobody to pass the information to because those foods may not even be available. So that's another issue of access. Another way, and probably more directly in terms of colonization, is that the media that we're surrounded with, whether it's visual media, television, or audio media, music, and radio, we're constantly being bombarded by commercials for different kinds of foods, different places to eat. Um, our print media, newspapers, magazines all have ads showing certain kinds of foods, and we're constantly reminded that these things are available, while on the other hand, our traditional food has been totally pushed aside. So we see, and we've come to, of course, we see these ads, so we go to them. Oh, this tastes real good, and then Then we go back, and then pretty soon those become one of our favorite places to eat. And this is really, the product of media. It really has nothing to do with us individually in terms of how we make choices. We probably wouldn't even know about that place if it wasn't for the media, or that particular kind of food, or this particular chain of fast food restaurants, or a special that's happening down at KFC, or a dollar menu at McDonald's. All of these are products of the uh, media, and it's a colonization process where our minds begin to um, look for those things rather than for our own traditional foods. And perhaps the last, and probably one of the saddest, is for a lot of people, we've lost our taste for our traditional foods. What I mean by that is, like, if you're looking at fast food, let's say Kentucky Fried Chicken, nice greasy piece of chicken, and this tastes so good, and you're looking at perhaps comparing that with some kind of a traditional food, you know, there is a taste difference. And the reason that that taste difference is there is that traditional food is produced a certain way, but it wasn't really based on the idea of making you want to eat it. That was a way of producing that particular food. Let's say it was just a cornmeal, or boiled buffalo meat or bison meat, or a salmon that's cooked outside on this thing. That's just the way you cook it. That's just the way it is. But when you compare that to modern day food, what we're seeing is that our when we walk into a McDonald's, say here in Santa Fe, and we walk into a McDonald's in Pocatello, Idaho, or Grand Rapids, Michigan, they're all going to taste the same. And that's because they've been scientifically designed to entice us to want to eat those things. And they've had chemicals added to them to impact the taste. There's a certain texture that comes with the fries. There's a certain texture that comes with the KFC. There's a certain texture that comes with the rice at the what is that panda thing that's going on these days. So anyway, so it's real easy for us to, our human bodies have over the years, over thousands of years, developed a taste for three things: fat, salt, and sugar. And those are the basic elements that goes into the scientific molding of food to meet our taste. And so a lot of people, they taste, our traditional tribal food, and they say, that's okay. So I'm really glad to eat it. I haven't tasted it in a couple of 3 years. It's really good. But then what disappears off of the table is the KFC that was brought by somebody, and they eat all that up. So to a certain degree, we've lost our taste for our traditional foods. Now, one of the issues related to decolonizing our taste buds is having a knowledge of where our food comes from and how it impacts us. So basically, it comes down to how we get our food often determines what food we get. So let's go back to the pre-contact days or first contact days, and a lot of tribes were hunting and gathering tribes. And so those hunting and gathering tribes had wild game, wild berries and fruits and tubers and vegetables that they gathered. They had places that they went to gather these things up. Contrary to common belief, and this is one of those issues of Western colonial stereotyping. Indian men hunted and hunted a lot, but we didn't rely that much on meat in our diet. We relied on other things in our diet, and meat was a part of it, but wasn't a total part of it. Wasn't the totality of our diets. We had a very varied and a lot of diversity within our cuisine. But these hunting and gathering tribes, they went after the fish, they went after the deer, moose, whatever, elk, went after the ground squirrel and the gophers and the rabbits. And so there's a way of cooking all of these things, and this food was the food that they got. And the horticulture, the other form of contact and pre-contact subsistence, was horticulture. And that is, horticulture is when you have small scale farmings, and not agriculture is large fields, and horticulture is when you grow food primarily for your family, and for tribal people that's our extended families. And horticulture is primarily found in the area of what we call the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. And these three sisters grow together. And it's kind of interesting, and one of the reasons it's real easy to say that we did not rely that heavily on wild game and meat for protein is that you can get a complete protein with the amino acids necessary to have the kind of protein produced by animal protein if you combine legumes and grain. Well, beans are legumes and corn is grain. And so we end up in a situation where we have a perfect protein that's being provided by these two plants, the corn and the squash, through the beans and the corn once it's dried. Then we add to that the heavy carbohydrate load that comes with squash. Now, when you go to the grocery store today, you might see 2 or 3 different kinds of squash. There was hundreds of varieties of squash, hundreds of varieties of beans, and hundreds of varieties of corn throughout North America. And horticulture is most tribes, the property belonged to the woman, meaning that she had the field responsibility for taking care of the field, and because that's her family. It's a matrilineal society by and large. And through this horticulture, a lot of tribes developed huge stores and surpluses of food. Now, today very few people hunt and gather as their primary way of getting food. There's still a few people, indigenous people in North America, that do this on a regular basis, where they get the majority of their food from hunting and gathering. There's still a few communities where the people get the majority of their food through horticulture, but again, those are pretty limited. So what we have right now is a dependency on industrial agriculture and the distribution system that goes with that. So this ends up meaning that the food that we get comes from great distances. If you're eating if it's in the dead of winter in January in North America and you're eating a fresh strawberry, we know that it came from a long ways off. It probably came from south of the equator. Probably was air freighted in. And so we have this, the food that we get often comes from a great distance. They say that the average loaf of bread travels 1,500 miles before it gets to where you might purchase it. We also have industrialized production, and that industrialized production, the process has lowered the nutritional value of a lot of the food that we get today. And it's nice to have that variety, and quite honestly, that industrialized production is what provides a way for 6.5 billion people to live on this planet. Whereas if we're doing horticulture and hunting and gathering, we would have a much smaller population. But the industrialized production also has its drawbacks. We're going to talk about that more in part 2 of this. And then again, our tastes and our cravings that we have in this industrialized agricultural distribution society or distribution system is really media driven. A lot of times, when we see billboards with Coca-Cola on it or Pepsi or something like that, that may spur it. We see that picture, we may want it at that point. And so what the kind of food that we get is often based on where we get it from. And as long as we're getting it from the industrial agricultural system and the distribution system therein, there's a lot of challenges to our being able to look at and appreciate and enjoy our traditional foods.